May 1945. Soviet forces control a strip of territory running from the Baltic to the Adriatic, the largest contiguous military occupation zone in European history. And embedded within every Soviet army group, operating alongside the combat units, are specialized teams with a mission that has nothing to do with fighting German soldiers. They are called trophy brigades, Trofejny brigady, and their job is to find, assess, and ship everything of military value from occupied German territory back to the Soviet Union before anyone else can reach it. The Soviets had been running organized equipment capture operations since 1941, when German weapons abandoned during rapid advances became a critical supplement to Soviet forces suffering catastrophic equipment losses in the opening months of the war. Soviet forces had captured German tanks, aircraft, and artillery in large numbers during the counteroffensives of 1942 and 1943, and the systematic evaluation of this material, conducted at facilities outside Moscow and at forward research stations, had already generated substantial intelligence on German weapons development. By 1943, dedicated units with technical specialists were cataloging and evaluating captured German weapons in the field within days of capture, reporting on their characteristics to design bureaus that could incorporate findings into Soviet weapons programs still in development. By 1945, the trophy brigades had evolved into a sophisticated exploitation organization with pre-assigned target lists, specialist teams for each weapons category, and logistics chains capable of moving heavy industrial equipment from central Germany to Soviet research facilities within weeks. What they found in the spring of 1945 exceeded even the optimistic projections Soviet planners had prepared. Germany's industrial heartland, the Ruhr and Rhine valleys in the west, and the regions of Thuringia, Saxony, and Silesia in the east, held manufacturing facilities, weapons research centers, and prototype development sites that represented a decade of German engineering investment. The Soviet occupation zone contained a disproportionate share of Germany's precision manufacturing and weapons research infrastructure, partly by geography and partly because Allied and Soviet forces had both maneuvered in the war's final weeks with an awareness that what they captured mattered beyond the immediate military situation. At weapons factories and test ranges across the occupation zone, trophy brigade teams found material in quantities that required weeks to catalog. Complete production lines for artillery shells, small arms, and vehicle components were dismantled bolt by bolt and loaded onto freight trains heading east. At the Carl Zeiss Optical Works in Jena, the facility that had produced gun sights, periscopes, and precision optics for the entire German military, Soviet engineers arrived within days of the city's capture and began the systematic removal of equipment that represented decades of precision manufacturing expertise. Testing ranges yielded examples of every German weapons type that had seen service, often in multiple variants and in conditions far better than any battlefield capture could produce. Not battle-damaged wrecks but factory-condition evaluation examples that German ordnance departments had maintained specifically for ongoing testing purposes. At the Junkers aircraft engine facility in Dessau, engineers found complete production specifications and functional examples of the Jumo 004 jet engine, the turbine that had powered Germany's Me-262 jet fighter and represented the most advanced operational jet technology in the world at the time. Within weeks, the production equipment, tooling, and most of the engineering documentation had been loaded onto rail cars and was moving east towards Soviet research facilities. But the single most extraordinary capture of the entire trophy brigade operation happened not at a factory or a test range, but at a proving ground outside Berlin, where German engineers had been developing a weapon that defied rational military logic. They found the Maus. The Panzerkampfwaffe 8 Maus. The Maus, with characteristic German irony applied to a vehicle weighing 188 metric tons, was Adolf Hitler's most extreme expression of the belief that bigger was always better in armored warfare. Designed by Ferdinand Porsche and armed with a 128mm main gun capable of destroying any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 3,500 meters, the Maus was also so heavy that it could cross almost no bridge in Europe, consumed fuel at rates that made sustained operations essentially impossible, and moved at a maximum speed of 13 kilometers per hour. Germany had built 2 prototypes. When Soviet forces approached the Kummersdorf proving ground in April 1945, German engineers destroyed the first prototype, the V1, to prevent capture. The second prototype, the V2, was found damaged but largely intact. Soviet engineers shipped what they had to Kubinka, the tank testing and development facility outside Moscow that had been evaluating captured equipment since the early years of the war. At Kubinka, technicians combined the most intact components from both prototypes, the hull from the V2, elements from the destroyed V1, into a single, approximately complete vehicle. The result is the only surviving mouse on Earth, still at Kubinka today, a monument to the outer limits of what German engineering was willing to attempt in the final years of the war. Kubinka Tank Museum, roughly 65 kilometers west of Moscow, is today one of the most significant collections of armored military vehicles in the world. During the Cold War, it operated as a closed military research facility. Since the 1990s, it has been progressively open to visitors. What it holds, the product of decades of Soviet trophy collection and careful preservation, is a physical record of what the Red Army captured, studied, and chose to keep. The German section at Kubinka contains armor that doesn't exist anywhere else on Earth. The Maus is the most famous exhibit, but the collection extends to a Tiger II, the heaviest German tank to reach mass production. A Jag Tiger, the heaviest German tank destroyer ever built at 71 tons, a Nashorn, a Jag Panther, and examples of virtually every other significant German armored vehicle of the war. Soviet engineers at Kubinka subjected each of these vehicles to the same systematic evaluation: drive them, fire them, measure their fuel consumption, assess their armor against captured German ammunition types and Soviet equivalents, document their mechanical reliability under extended operation. The Tiger II evaluation at Kubinka produced findings that were simultaneously confirming and clarifying. The vehicle's frontal armor, 150 mm on the turret face, set at angles that significantly increased effective protection, was assessed as essentially impenetrable to Soviet 85 mm guns at combat ranges and resistant to the 122 mm gun in the IS-2 heavy tank at ranges beyond 500 meters. The 88 mm KWK-43 gun fitted to the Tiger II could defeat the IS-2's armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. On pure technical specifications, the Tiger II was more powerful than anything the Soviet Union was producing in 1945. The Kubinka evaluation identified why it hadn't decided the war. Its final drive and transmission were chronically unreliable, its fuel consumption limited its operational range to under 150 kilometers on roads and far less cross-country, and its weight made river crossings and soft-ground operations a constant problem. A Tiger II that had broken down on a road to the front was providing exactly zero tactical value regardless of how formidable its specifications were. The Panther evaluation told a different and more alarming story from the Soviet perspective. The Panther's sloped hull armor and long 75 mm gun represented a design philosophy prioritizing a balance of firepower, protection, and mobility rather than maximizing any single characteristic that Soviet engineers considered more relevant to future tank development than the Tiger's brute force approach. The T-54 and T-55 tanks that became the backbone of Cold War Soviet armor in the 1950s show clear evidence of this assessment: their sharply sloped hull armor, their relatively low profile, and their balance of 100 mm firepower with adequate mobility without sacrificing mechanical reliability are conceptual descendants of the Panther evaluation as much as they are of original Soviet design thinking. German small arms captured by Soviet forces went through evaluation at facilities in Moscow and Tula, the center of Russian small arms manufacturing since the 18th century, home to the facilities that had been producing weapons for the Russian military since Peter the Great. The MG-42 machine gun received the same enthusiastic assessment from Soviet engineers that their American and British counterparts had filed independently: its cyclic rate of up to 1,500 rounds per minute, its reliable belt feed mechanism, and its quick-change barrel system were assessed as superior to Soviet equivalents in almost every operationally relevant metric. Soviet engineers noted in their evaluation reports that the MG-42 had been so effective in defensive positions throughout the Eastern Front that standard Red Army tactics for assaulting German defensive lines had been built specifically around neutralizing it. German mortars, particularly the 120 mm Granatwerfer 42, were evaluated and found so superior to standard Soviet types that the Soviet military simply adopted the design directly, producing a copy as the M1943 mortar that remained in Soviet and then Russian service for decades. And the STG-44 assault rifle arrived at Soviet facilities at approximately the same time as the man who had designed it. Hugo Schmeisser, the weapons engineer whose firm in Seoul had developed the STG-44, the selective-fire, intermediate cartridge rifle that many historians consider the template for every assault rifle since, was among the German weapons specialists relocated to the Soviet Union under Operation Osoaviakim in October 1946. Schmeisser and approximately 50 other weapons engineers from Seoul were transported to Izhevsk, the Soviet city that served as the center of small arms production, where they worked under Soviet direction until 1952. 1 year after Schmeisser arrived at Izhevsk, Mikhail Kalashnikov's design for the AK-47 was formally adopted as the standard Soviet service rifle. The relationship between the two events has been debated by historians and arms designers for 7 decades and shows no sign of resolution. The official Soviet and Russian position on the AK-47's origins has never changed. Mikhail Kalashnikov designed it independently, drawing on his own combat experience as a tank commander wounded at the Battle of Bryansk in 1941 and on engineering instincts developed through years of weapons work, rather than on the STG-44 or any German design. Kalashnikov himself maintained this position consistently and with evident conviction until his death in 2013 at the age of 94. A detailed technical comparison of the two weapons supports significant elements of that argument. The AK-47's long-stroke gas piston operation and rotating bolt lockup are mechanically distinct from the STG-44's tilting bolt and short-stroke gas operation, and engineers who have disassembled both agree that the AK-47 is not a copy of the STG-44 in any direct mechanical sense. Direct copying is not what the historical debate is actually about. What the debate is about is something more subtle. Whether the intermediate cartridge assault rifle concept itself, which the Soviet Union adopted as the foundation of its infantry weapons program in the late 1940s, was an independent development or a response to the STG-44's demonstration that the concept worked. The Soviet military had shown little interest in intermediate cartridges before encountering the STG-44 in combat at scale from 1943 onward. Within 2 years of that encounter, Soviet ordnance programs had developed the 7.62 by 39 mm intermediate cartridge. Within 4 years of the war's end, the AK-47 chambered in that cartridge was in service. Schmeisser was in Izhevsk for 6 of those years. The precise nature of his contribution, if any, to what happened at that facility during that period remains undocumented in any source currently available. The captured German jet technology produced more clearly traceable outcomes. The Jumo 004 engine documentation and manufacturing equipment captured at Dessau fed directly into Soviet jet engine development programs in the late 1940s, giving Soviet engineers a starting point that their own wartime jet research had not reached. The early Soviet jet programs also benefited from an entirely unexpected source that had nothing to do with captured German technology. The British government, in one of the more commercially optimistic and strategically questionable decisions of the early Cold War period, sold the Soviet Union 55 Rolls-Royce Nene and Derwent jet engines in 1946 and 1947, the most advanced jet engines Britain had produced, exported to a country that British military planners were simultaneously identifying as the primary future threat to Western security. The British government had debated the sale. The Board of Trade approved it. The Soviets reverse-engineered both engines with systematic thoroughness. The Soviets reverse-engineered both, producing the Klima VK-1 engine that powered the MiG-15, the swept-wing jet fighter that entered Korean War service in 1950 and stunned American pilots who had not expected to encounter a Soviet aircraft competitive with the F-86 Sabre. The German rocket program's capture by the Soviets produced the most far-reaching consequences of all. The trophy brigades secured significant portions of Peenemann's documentation and manufacturing equipment, along with German rocket engineers led by Helmut Grotrup, a senior technical figure who, unlike Wernher von Braun, had not arranged his own surrender to the Americans and ended up in Soviet hands instead. Grotrup and approximately 150 German rocket specialists were transported to the Soviet Union and worked on Soviet rocket programs from 1946 until their repatriation in 1952 and 1953. The R-1 rocket, the first operational Soviet ballistic missile, was essentially a V-2 built from German blueprints using Soviet manufacturing. The R-2 improved on it. The R-7, which launched Sputnik in 1957 and Yuri Gagarin in 1961, was a Soviet design, but it stood on the engineering foundation that German rocket technology had provided and that the trophy brigades had captured in the spring of 1945. The physical legacy of what the Soviets captured is most concentrated at Kubinka, where the German armor collection remains one of the most significant anywhere. The Maus sat for decades in outdoor storage, its condition deteriorating through Russian winters, before a restoration program brought it to display-quality condition in the early 2000s. The Tiger II, Jagdtiger, Nashorn, Panther, and associated German vehicles were similarly restored and are today the most visited exhibits in the museum, armor that the German military can no longer display in Germany, preserved in a Russian facility that has maintained it for 8 decades. Of all the consequences of what the trophy brigades captured in 1945, perhaps the most ironic is this: the most comprehensive collection of German WW2 military hardware in the world is not in Germany. It is in Russia. And the technology those weapons represented, in assault rifles, jet engines, and ballistic missiles, shaped the Cold War that followed the war that produced them, on the same side that had found the weapons in the rubble of a defeated country and decided they were worth keeping.